Part 2, sections 4 through 9 of All Things Are Possible by Lev Shestov. Translated by S.S. Koteliansky, 1888-1955. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Part 2, section 4. Metaphysicians praise the transcendental and carefully avoid it. Nietzsche hated metaphysics, he praised the earth, bleibt nur der Erde treu, o meine Brüder, and always lived in the realm of the transcendental. Of course the metaphysicians behave better, this is indisputable. He who would be a teacher must proclaim the metaphysical point of view, and he may become a hero without ever smelling powder. In these anxious days when positivism seems to fall short, one cannot do better than turn to metaphysics. Then the young man need not any more envy Alexander the Macedonian. With the assistance of a few books, not only earthly states are conquered, but the whole mysterious universe. Metaphysics is the great art of swerving round dangerous experience. So metaphysicians should be called the positivists par excellence. They do not despise all experience, as they assert, but only the dangerous experiences. They adapt the safest of all methods of self-defense, what the English call protective mimicry. Let us repeat to all students, professors know it already, he who would be a sincere metaphysician must avoid risky experience. Schiller once asked, how can tragedy give delight? The answer, to put it in our own words, was, if we are to obtain delight from tragedy, it must be seen only upon the stage. In order to love the transcendental, it also should be known only from the stage, or from books of the philosophers. This is called idealism, the nicest word ever invented by philosophizing men. 5. Poetae nascuntur. Wonderful is man. Knowing nothing about it, he asserts the existence of an objective impossibility. Even a little while ago, before the invention of the telephone and telegraph, men would have declared it impossible for Europe to converse with America. Now it is possible. We cannot produce poets, therefore we say they are born. Certainly we cannot make a child a poet by forcing him to study literary models, from the most ancient to the most modern. Neither will anybody hear us in America, no matter how loud we shout here. To make a poet of a man, he must not be developed along ordinary lines. Perhaps books should be kept from him. Perhaps it is necessary to perform some apparently dangerous operation on him, fracture his skull, or throw him out of a fourth-story window. I will refrain from recommending these methods as a substitute for pedagogy. But that is not the point. Look at the great men and the poets. Except John Stuart Mill and a couple of other positivist thinkers, who had learned fathers and virtuous mothers, none of the great men can boast of, or better, complain of, a proper upbringing. In their lives, nearly always the decisive part was played by accident. Accident which reason would dub meaninglessness, if reason ever dared raise its voice against obvious success. Something like a broken skull or a fall from the fourth floor, not metaphorically but often absolutely literally, has proved the commencement, usually concealed but occasionally avowed, of the activity of genius. But we repeat automatically, poetae nascuntur, and are deeply convinced that this extraordinary truth is so lofty, it needs no verification. 6. Until Apollo calls him to the sacrifice, ignobly the poet is plunged in the cares of this shoddy world. Silent is his lyre, cold sleeps his soul. Of all the petty children of earth, most petty it seems is he. Pissariev, the critic, was exasperated by these verses. Presumably, if they had not belonged to Poushkin, all the critics along with Pissariev would have condemned them and their author to oblivion. Suspicious verse! Before Apollo calls to him, the poet is the most insignificant of mortals. In his free hours, the ordinary man finds some more or less distinguished distraction for himself. He hunts, attends exhibitions of pictures or the theatre, and finally rests in the bosom of his family. But the poet is incapable of normal existence. Immediately he has finished with Apollo, forgetting all about altars and sacrifices, he proceeds to occupy himself with unworthy objects. or he abandons himself to the dolce far niente, the customary pastime of all favourites of the Muses. Let us here remark that not only all poets, but all writers and artists in general, are inclined to lead bad lives. Think what Tolstoy tells us in Confession and elsewhere of the best representatives of literature in the 50s. On the whole, it is just as Pushkin says in his verses. Whilst he is engaged in composition, an author is a creature of some consequence. Apart from this, he is nothing. Why are Apollo and the Muses so remiss? Why do they draw to themselves wayward or vicious votaries, instead of rewarding virtue? We dare not suspect the gods, even the dethroned, of bad intentions. Apollo loved virtuous persons, and yet virtuous persons are evidently mediocre and unfit for the sacred offices. If any man is overcome with a great desire to serve the god of song, let him get rid of his virtues at once. Curious that this truth is so completely unknown to men. They think that through virtue they can truly deserve the favour and choice of Apollo. And since industry is the first virtue, they peg away morning, noon and night. Of course the more they work, the less they do. Which really puzzles and annoys them. They even fling aside the sacred arts and all the labours of a devotee. They give themselves up to idleness and other bad habits. And sometimes it so happens that just as a man decides that it is all no good, the Muses suddenly visit him. So it was with Dostoevsky and others. Schiller alone managed to get round Apollo. But perhaps it was only his biographers he got round. Germans are so trustful, so easy to deceive. The biographers saw nothing unusual in Schiller's habit of keeping his feet in cold water whilst he worked. No doubt they felt that if the divine poet had lived in the Sahara, where water is precious as gold, and the inspired cannot take a foot bath every day, then the speeches of the Marquis of Pola would have lacked half their nobleness at least. And apparently Schiller was not so wonderfully chaste, if he needed such artificial resources in the composition of his fine speeches. In a word, we must believe Pushkin. A poet is, on the one hand, among the elect. On the other hand, he is one of the most insignificant of mortals. Hence we can draw a very consoling conclusion. The most insignificant of men are not altogether so worthless as we imagine. They may not be fit to occupy government positions or professorial chairs, but they are often extremely at home on Parnassus and such high places. Apollo rewards vice, and virtue, as everybody knows, is so satisfied with herself she needs no reward. Then why do the pessimists lament? Leibniz was quite right. We live in the best possible of worlds. I would even suggest that we leave out the modification possible. 7. It is das ewig Weibliche with Russian writers. Pushkin and Lermontov loved women and were not afraid of them. Who trusted his own nature was often in love, and always sang his love of the moment. When infatuated with a bacchante, he glorified bacchantes. When he married, he warbled of a modest, nun-like beauty, his wife. A synthesizing mind would probably not know what to do with all Pushkin's sorts of love. Nor is Lermontov any better. He abused women, but as Byelinsky observed after meeting him, he loved women more than anything in the world. And again, not women of one mould only, any and all attractive females. The wild Bella, the lovely Mary, Tamar, one and all, no matter of what race or condition. Every time Lermontov is in love, he assures us his love is so deep and ardent and even moral that we cannot judge him without compunction. Vladimir Solovyov alone was not afraid to condemn him. He brought Pushkin as well as Lermontov to account for their moral irregularities. And he even went so far as to say that it was not he himself who judged them, but fate, in whose service he acted as public denouncer. Lermontov and Pushkin, both dying young, had deserved death for their frivolities. But there was nobody else besides Vladimir Solovyov to darken the memories of the two poets. It is true Tolstoy cannot forgive Pushkin's dissolute life, but he does not apply to fate for a verdict. According to Tolstoy, morality can cope even with a titan like Pushkin. In Tolstoy's view, morality grows stronger the harder the job it has to tackle. It pardons the weak offenders without waste of words, but it never forgives pride and self-confidence. If Tolstoy's edicts had been executed, all memorials to Pushkin would have disappeared, chiefly because of the poet's addiction to the eternal female. In such a case Tolstoy is implacable. He admits the kind of love whose object is the establishing of a family, but no more. Don Juan is a hateful transgressor. Think of Levin and his attitude to prostitutes. He is exasperated, indignant, even forgets the need for compassion and calls them beasts. In the eternal female, Tolstoy sees temptation, seduction, sin, great danger. Therefore it is necessary to keep quite away from the danger. But surely danger is the dragon which guards every treasure on earth. And again, no matter what his precautions, a man will meet his fate sooner or later and come into conflict with the dragon. Surely this is an axiom. Pushkin and Lermontov loved danger, and therefore sought women. They paid a heavy price, but while they lived freely and lightly. If they had cared to peep in the book of destinies, they might have averted or avoided their sad end. But they preferred to trust their star, lucky or unlucky. Tolstoy was the first among us — we cannot speak of Gogol — who began to fear life. He was the first to start open moralizing. In so far as public opinion and personal dignity demand it, he did go to meet his dangers, but not a step further. So he avoided women, art, and philosophy. Love per se, that is, love which does not lead to a family, like wisdom per se, which is wisdom that has no utilitarian motive, and like art for art's sake, seemed to him the worst of temptations, leading to the destruction of the soul. When he plunged too deep in thinking, he was seized with panic. It seemed to me I was going mad, so I went away to the Bashkirs for kumiss. Such confessions are common in his works. And surely there is no other way with temptations than to cut short at once before it is too late. Tolstoy preserved himself on account of his inborn instinct for departing betimes from a dangerous situation. Save for this cautious prompting, he would probably have ended like Lermontov or Pushkin. True, he might have gone deeper into nature and revealed us rare secrets, instead of preaching at us abstinence, humility, simplicity, and so on. But such luck fell to the fate of Dostoevsky. Dostoevsky had very muddled relations with morality. He was too racked by disease and circumstance to get much profit out of the rules of morality. The hygiene of the soul, like that of the body, is beneficial only to healthy men. To the sick it is simply harmful. The more Dostoevsky engaged himself with high morality, the more inextricably entangled he became. He wanted to respect the personality in a woman, and only the personality. And so he came to the point where he could not look on any woman, however ugly, with indifference. The elder Karamazov, and his affair with Elizabeth Smerdyascha, Stinking Lizzie — in what other imagination could such a union have been contemplated? Dostoevsky, of course, reprimands Karamazov, and thanks to the standards of modern criticism, such a reprimand is accounted sufficient to exonerate our author. But there are other standards. If a writer sets out to tell you that no drab could be so loathsome that her ugliness would make you forget she was a woman, and if for illustration of this novel idea we are told the history of Fyodor Karamazov with the deformed, repulsive idiot, Stinking Lizzie, then, in face of such imaginative art, it is surely out of place to preserve the usual confidence in that writer. We do not speak of the interest and appreciation of Dostoevsky's tastes and ideas. Not for one moment will I assert that those who with Pushkin and Lermontov can see the eternal female only in young and charming women have any advantage over Dostoevsky. Of course we are not forbidden to live according to our tastes, and we may, like Tolstoy, call certain women beasts. But who has given us the right to assert that we are higher or better than Dostoevsky? Judging objectively, all the points go to show that Dostoevsky is better. At any rate, he saw further, deeper. He could find an original interest. He could discover das ewig Weibliche, where we should see nothing of attraction at all, where Goethe would avert his face. Stinking Lizzie is not a beast, as Levin would say, but a woman who is able, if even for a moment, to arouse a feeling of love in a man. And we thought she was worse than nothing, since she roused in us only disgust. Dostoevsky made a discovery, we with our refined feelings missed it. His distorted, abnormal sense showed a greater sensitiveness in which our high morality was deficient. And the road to the great truth this time, as ever, is through deformity. Idealists will not agree. They are quite justly afraid that one may not reach the truth, but may get stuck in the mud. Idealists are careful men, and not nearly so stupid as their ideals would lead us to suppose. 8. New ideas, even our own, do not quickly conquer our sympathies. We must first get accustomed to them. 9. A point of view. Every writer, thinker, even every educated person thinks it necessary to have a permanent point of view. He climbs up some elevation and never climbs down again all his days. Whatever he sees from this point of view, he believes to be reality, truth, justice, good, and what he does not see, he excludes from existence. Man is not much to blame for this. Surely there is no very great joy in moving from point of view to point of view, shifting one's camp from peak to peak. We have no wings, and a winged thought is only a nice metaphor, unless, of course, it refers to logical thinking. There, to be sure, great volatility is usual, a lightness which comes from perfect naivete, if not ignorance. He who really wishes to know something, and not merely to have a philosophy, does not rely on logic and is not allured by reason. He must clamber from summit to summit, and, if necessary, hibernate in the dales. For a wide horizon leads to illusions, and in order to familiarize oneself with any object, it is essential to go close up to it, touch it, feel it, examine it from top to bottom, and on every side. One must be ready, should this be impossible otherwise, to sacrifice the customary position of the body, to wriggle, to lie flat, to stand on one's head, in a word, to assume the most unnatural of attitudes. Can there be any question of a permanent point of view ? The more mobility and elasticity a man has, the less he values the ordinary equilibrium of his body. The oftener he changes his outlook, the more he will take in. If, on the other hand, he imagines that from this or the other pinnacle he has the most comfortable survey of the world and life, leave him alone. He will never know anything. Nay, he does not want to know. He cares more about his personal convenience than about the quality of his work. No doubt he will attain to fame and success, and thus brilliantly justify his point of view. End of part 2, section 9, recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine.